Hello friends and welcome back to another Invisible Man reading. Today I'm reading chapter 21 in Oxford Street. In going downstairs the first time I found an unexpected difficulty because I could not see my feet. Indeed I stumbled twice and there was an unaccustomed clumsiness in gripping the bolt. By not looking down, however, I managed to walk on the level passably well. My mood, I say, was on escalation. My mood, I say, was once on escalation. I felt as a seeing man might do, with padded feet and noiseless clothes, in a city of the blind. I experienced a wild impulse to jest, to startle people, to clap men on the back, fling people's hats astray, and gently revel in my extraordinary advantage. But hardly had I emerged upon a great Portland street, however, my lodging was close to the big dapper shop there, when I heard a clashing occasion, and was hit violently behind, and turning saw a man carrying a basket of soda water siphons, and looking amazed at his burden. Although the blow had really hurt me, I found something so irresistible in his astonishment that I laughed aloud. "The devil's in the basket," I said, and suddenly twisted it out of his hand. He let go incontinently, and I swung the whole weight into the air. But a fool of a cabman standing outside a public house made a sudden rush for this, and his extended fingers took me in with excruciating violence. Under the ear. I let the whole down with a smash on the cabman, and then with shouts and the clatter of feet about me, people coming from shops, vehicles pulling up, I realized what I had done for myself, and cursing my folly, backed against a shop window and prepared to dodge out of the confusion. In a moment I should be wedged into a crowd and inevitably discovered. I pushed by the butcher boy and luckily did not turn to see the nothingness that shoved him aside, and dodged behind the cabman's four-wheeler. I do not know how they settled the business. I hurried straight across the road, which was happily clean, and hardly heeded which way I went in the freight of deduction. The innocent had plunged into the afternoon throng of Oxford Street. I tried to get into this stream of people, but they were too thick for me, and in a moment my heels were being trodden upon. I took to the gutter, the roughness of which I found painful to my feet, and forthwith the shaft of a crawling hansom dug me forcibly under the shoulder blade, reminding me that I was already bruised severely. I staggered out of the way of the cab, avoided a perambulator by a convulsive moment, and found myself behind the hansom A happy thought saved me, and at this drove slowly along. I followed in its immediate wake, trembling and astonished at the turn of my adventure, and not only trembling but shivering. It was a bright day in January, and I was stark naked, and the thin slime of mud that covered the road was freezing. Foolish as it seemed to me now, I had not reckoned that, transparent or not, I was still admirable to the weather and all its consequences. And then suddenly a bright idea came into my head. I ran around and got into the cab, and so shivering, scared, and sniffed with the first intimidations of a cold, and with the bruises and the smalls of my back growing upon my attention, I drove slowly along Oxford Street and past uh, Tottenham, Tottenham Court Road. My mood was as different from that in which I had sailed forth 10 minutes ago, as if it is possible to imagine the invisibility indeed. The one thought that possessed me was how was I going to get out of the scrape I was in? We crawled past Murdy's, and there a tall woman with 5 or 6 yellow labeled books hailed my cab, and I sprung out just in time to escape her, shaving a railway van narrowly in my flight. I made off up into the roadway to Bloomsbury Square, intending to strike north past the museum and to get into the quiet district. I was not cruelly chilled, and the strangeness of my situation so unnerving me that I whis- whimpered as I whimpered as I ran. At the northward corner of the square, a little white dog ran out of the Ferriculum Society's office, and innocently made for me, nose down. I had never realized it before, but the nose is to the mind of a dog what the eye is to the mind of a seeing man. Dogs perceive the scent of a man moving as men perceive his vision. This brute began barking and leaping, showing, as it seemed to me, only too plainly that it was aware of me. I crossed Great Russell Street, glancing over the shoulders as I did so, and and went some way along Montague Street before I realized what I was running towards. Then I became aware of a blare of music, and looking along the street saw a number of people advancing out of Russell Square, red shirts and banners of Salvation Army to the fore. Such a crowd chanting in the roadway and scoffing on the pavement. I could not hope to penetrate, and dreading to go back and farther from home again, and deciding on the spur of the moment, I ran up the white steps of the house facing the museum railing, and stood there until the crowd should have passed. Happily, the dog stopped at the noise of the band too, hesitated, and turned tail, running back to Bloomsbury Square again. On came the band, brawling with unconscious irony, some hymn about when shall we see his face, and it seemed an interminable time to me before the tide of the crowd washed along the pavement by me. Thud, thud, thud came the drum with a vibrating resonance, and for the moment I did not notice two urchins stopping at the railings by me. "See 'em," said one. "See what?" said the other. "Why, them footmarks, bare like what you make in mud." I looked down and saw the youngsters had stopped and were gaping at the muddy footmarks I had left behind me. The newly whitened steps, the passing people elbowed and jolting them, but their confounded intelligence was arrested. Thud, thud, thud. When thud shall we see thud? His face, thud, thud. There's a barefoot man gone up them steps, or I don't know nothing, said one, and he ain't never coming down again, and his foot was a bleeding. The thick of the crowd was already passing. "Looky there, Ted," quoth the youngster of the detectives, with the sharpness of surprise in his voice, and pointed straight to my feet. I looked down and saw at once the dim suggestion of their outlines sketched in splashes of mud. For a moment I was paralyzed. "Why, that's rum," said the elder. "Dashed rum. It's just like a ghost of a foot, ain't it?" He hesitated and advanced with outstretched hand. A man pulled up short to see what he was catching, and then a girl in another moment he would have touched me. Then I saw what to do. I made a step. The boy stared back with an exclamation, and with a rapid movement, I swung myself over into the uh, portico of the next house. But the smaller boy was sharp-eyed enough to follow the movements, and before I was well down the steps and upon the pavement, he had recovered from his uh, momentary astonishment and was shouting out that the feet had gone over the wall. They rushed around and saw my new footmarks flash into being on the lower steps and upon the pavement. "What's up?" asked someone. Feet running. Everybody in the road except my three pursuers was pouring along after the Salvation Army, and this was not only impended me, but them. There was an eddy of surprise and in inter interrogation at the cost of bowling over one young fellow. I got through, and in another moment I was rushing headlong round the circuits of Russell Square, with 6 or 7 astonished people following my footmarks. There was no time for explanation, or else the whole host would have been after me. Twice I doubled around the corners, thrice I crossed the road and came back on my tracks, and then my feet grew hot and dry. The damp impressions began to fade. At last I had a breathing space and rubbed my feet clean with my hands, and so got away altogether. The last I saw of the chase was a little group of a dozen people, perhaps studying with infinite perplexity a slowly drying footprint that had resulted from a puddle in Travis Scott Square, a footprint as isolated and incomprehensible to them as Curso's solitary discovery. This running warmed me to a certain extent, and I went on with a better courage through the maze of less frequent roads that run hereabouts hereabouts. My back had now become very stiff and sore. My tonsils were painful from the cabman's fingers, and the skin of my neck had been scratched by his nails. My feet hurt exceedingly, and I was lame for a little cut on the foot. I saw it in time, a blind man approaching me, and fled imping, for I feared his subtle intrusion. Once or twice accidental collisions occurred, and I left people amazed, with unaccountable curses ringing in their ears. Then came something silent and quiet against my face, and across the square fell a thin vial of slowly falling flakes of snow. If I had caught a cold, and do as I would, I could not avoid an occasional sneeze, and every dog that came in sight with its pointing nose and curious sniffer was a terror to me. Then came men and boys running first one and then another, and shouting as they ran. It was a fire. They ran in the direction of my lodging, and looking back down a street, I saw a mass of black smoke steaming up above the roofs and telephone wires. It was my lodging burning, my clothes, my apparatus, all my resources indeed, except my checkbook and 3 volumes of memoranda that waited me in Great Portland Street were there were there were there burning. I had burnt my boats, if ever a man did. The place was blazing. The Invisible Man paused and thought. Kemp glanced nervously out the window. "Yes," he said. "Go on." And that's the end of chapter 21. Tune in tomorrow for chapter 22. So, friends, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Follow us on social media at funkyplaybrothers and funkyplaybrothers. And please remember to help us by subscribing to our YouTube. Thank you for watching. Bye.